What's cracking, yo? Welcome back to Boo TV. Appreciate you for stopping in. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified, and let's get into the topic for today. What's good? Welcome back, everybody. Still plowing through all our Larry Bird content. And as usual, like I say on every video, go check out our other playlists, our reaction video playlist, our Larry Bird playlist. And if you have anything you want me to react to or topic to discuss, please let me know in the comment section. And just share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section in general, okay? This video we have today, When the Game Was Ours, Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, is a video that was recommended by subscriber/viewer Kelly McAllister. So Kelly, I appreciate you. Thank you for the recommendation. And let's get into it. This is old school as AF old school. It feels like Masterpiece Theater right now. Okay, this was a book.
Books of Our Time, brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law and seen nationwide. Today we shall discuss a book called When the Game Was Ours. The book is an unprecedented collaboration between NBA greats Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, who gave first-hand accounts of their parallel careers and the effect each had on the other. With me to discuss the book is its author, Jackie McMullen, a nationally recognized sports columnist both for ESPN and previously the Boston Globe. And I am Holly Vitsky, a professor at the Massachusetts School of Law. Welcome, Jackie. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Holly.
My first question is, Bird and Magic last played against each other competitively more than 15 years ago. What gave you the idea to do the book now?
Well, honestly, it's been something that's been going on for quite a while, to be honest with you, Holly. It was something that we thought about 6-7 years ago. Magic came to me. Magic's always got his wheels in motion, and he said, you know, I've always wanted to do a project with Larry. We want to do a coffee table book. So we need someone to just write a few words, 20,000 words. Would you do that? And I said, well, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, on we go, and the project gets going, and there was a calamity of errors that I won't go into here, but many things went wrong, and the project fell apart. And I always say, what a blessing it was that it did, because then we got to do the real book, which is the book that I always wanted to do, and that was to chronicle their parallel lives and the fact that these two players were so intertwined with one another that you couldn't think about one without the other.
Did you sit down with them together? How did you conduct the interviews, or did you do it separately?
A little bit of both. It's very hard to get them together, and so there was very little of that. And I really think in the end it was advantageous, because you sit down with Larry and you start asking him very personal questions about Magic. If Irvin was sitting right there, I'm not sure I would have gotten the same response. So I went out to Indianapolis, spent 2.5 days with Larry, stayed at his home.
Pause. She might have a point there. I think with a lot of people, if the player's sitting right there, they probably won't say some things. But I feel like Bird and Magic are pretty much straight shooters, pretty straightforward. They'll tell it to you how it is, at least on most subjects, I think. They're pretty comfortable talking about anything, and I think anything that has to be said is probably more or less some type of respect embedded in whatever their opinion is. But that's just my opinion. But I do know there are a lot of people that won't say what they got to say in front of somebody. But I just never took Larry or Magic as that type of person. Let's roll.
Home, went to dinner with his family, interviewed him, had quite a bit of information, flew out to Magic's Dana Point Resort. He put me up in the most glamorous hotel he could find. It's kind of indicative of their two personalities, honestly.
Right, that's funny.
Spent about 3 days with him, and that's where we started. Then I went back to Larry with all the things that Irvin had told me. I went back to Irvin with the other things that Larry told me. And then you start interviewing the players, the coaches, the childhood friends. I think I interviewed over 100 people for this book besides Irvin and Larry. And, anyone that's done a project like this will tell you the best stuff always comes from somebody else. It's pretty hard to talk about yourself.
Yeah. Now, you covered Larry during his career here, but how did Magic come to ask you to be a
Well, I knew Magic pretty well. In fact, I used to joke that Magic talked to me more than Larry did, even though I was covering Larry on the beat here for the Boston Globe. Whenever the Lakers came to town, over the years, because I covered the NBA so frequently, Irvin got to know me pretty well. And unlike Larry, if Irvin would come to town, he'd say, "So Jackie, what's going on? Tell me." He wanted to know all the gossip in the Celtics locker room and all the gossip through the league, and he would seek me out before a game and talk to me for 10, 15 minutes. Oftentimes with Larry, I never was even sure he knew my name. So I often had more conversations with Irvin during that time than I did with Larry.
Now, most people believe that the first time they met, Larry and Magic, was the 1979 NCAA championship. But you write in your book that that's not the case.
No, it wasn't actually. The summer before that, they both played on an all-star team that was a classic made-for-television event. It was called the WIT, the World Invitational Tournament. And what it was a group of college all-stars playing international teams. Well, they picked Joe B. Hall, the Kentucky coach, to be the coach of that team because his Kentucky team had just won the national championship just days before that. So Joe B. Hall picked his team and, of course, picked 5 of his own players. And then Dave Gavitt and some others filled in some of the other players. Larry Bird got chosen. Irvin Johnson got chosen. Darrell Griffith, Thurl Bailey, James Bailey, some big names in college basketball. Sidney Moncrief was on the team.
Sidney
so
Moncrief.
Irvin and Larry met for the first time at that event, and but barely spoke to one another. Again, typical Larry. Larry would get on the bus and say hello and nothing else. Irvin would get on the bus with his boombox, dancing. He was the youngest player on the team, but clearly the most precocious nonetheless.
Now, as Magic put it, Larry and Magic dominated and embarrassed the starters during practices, but why were they relegated to the bench during games then?
Well, it's interesting. Joe B. Hall just was convinced that his Kentucky team, they had just won the championship, they were the best players. And it didn't matter that in practice, Larry and Magic were really embarrassing some of those starters, Kyle Macy and Rick Roby, to be specific, those 2 players in particular. And they would kill them in practice, and yet when the starting lineup came out, Macy and Roby's names were always written in, and it used to really frost Larry in particular. He was really ticked off, but he figured, well, you know what? The heck with this guy. I'm just going to have my fun in practice. So that's what they had to settle for.
How did current Boston Globe columnist Bob Bryan get Larry on that team, or what was the connection there?
Well, it was funny. Larry was playing for Indiana State, and of course putting up big numbers back then. And but remember, this is the year before the national championship, the undefeated season. So people are paying attention, but not really, because they figured that conference that Indiana State played in wasn't a very big conference. But Ryan's a basketball genius, an aficionado, and he knew better, and he kept hearing from the Celtics about this kid, Larry Bird. So when he was covering the NCAA tournament nearby, he took a drive out to Indiana State and watched them play in the NIT. He watched Larry Bird play for 3 minutes and said, "Oh my God, this guy's unbelievable." Now the funny part is, most of the rest of the country thought Larry Bird was African American because they'd never seen him play on TV. He was never on television.
And what was the Boston connection to that tournament?
Boston connection. Well, Red Auerbach showed up at that tournament, and he was walking down the steps, and the players were walking up the steps, and Michael Korn nudged Larry Bird and said, "Wow, look, there's Red." And Larry said, "Red who?" And he said, "That's Red Auerbach. He's the president of the Celtics." Larry said, "Oh, okay, whatever." What Larry didn't realize was Red was there to see him play. Never knew it. Didn't know who Red Auerbach was. Larry didn't know anybody outside of French Lick.
Now, it could have happened that Larry and Magic would have played together on the same college team. We all know how Larry left Indiana 24 days after starting, but how did Bobby Knight lose Magic too?
Well, I'm not sure if Bobby Knight lost Magic. Magic might have lost Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight did want to come talk to Irvin, came to his high school, told his high school coach, "I'll be there at," I think he told him, 2 o'clock. And, of course, showed up at 1 o'clock and started roaming the halls. And he wanted to see Irvin Johnson in his own setting and watch this kid who was supposed to be this great player. And what he saw was a Pied Piper, all the kids following him, and, really agile, a lot of adulation going on in the hallways. But clearly could see that Irvin was a leader, a born leader. So they get them to sit down in the cafeteria. And Irvin's a nervous wreck, okay, because he's seen this guy on TV, crazy, going, yelling, screaming at everybody, throwing stuff. And he was nervous about meeting Coach Knight. But the Coach Knight that showed up at his high school was affable and friendly and funny and went out of his way to make both Irvin and his high school coach feel very, very comfortable. George Fox remarked later he couldn't believe how nice he was. So they were sitting there talking very amiably with each other, and a lot of small talk. And then finally, Bobby Knight's tone changed immediately. He said, "Okay, Irvin, where the hell are you going to school?" So this caught both Magic and his coach a little, wasn't really prepared for that. And, Irvin told him the truth. He said, "Coach, I don't know if I can play for you. I see you screaming at those other players, and I don't know if that's really what I want. I don't know if that's something I can handle." So Knight kind of looked at him a little bit and cocked his head and straightened out his shirt, stood up, shook the coach's hand, and left. And that was the end of the conversation.
Really?
I think the message was, you know what, son? You don't want to play for me at Indiana? I'll go find someone who does.
And what was Denny Crum's recruiting tactic for Bird?
Well, Bird really didn't want to leave the state of Indiana. The only school that he would have considered outside of the state was Kentucky. Well, Denny Crum was smart. He really wanted Bird to just come for a visit. He figured if he could just get him on campus that he'd be able to convince him to go play there. Bird wanted no part of it. Now, he liked Denny Crum. He thought Denny Crum was pretty funny, and he had known him through his international play. They had crossed paths. But he didn't really understand why he should go to Louisville when he knew he wasn't going to go there. So he said, I'll have a free-throw contest. We'll have a shooting contest. And whoever wins, we'll play a horse. And whoever wins, if I win, I don't have to go to Louisville. If I lose, I'll come for a visit. And Bird's figuring, this little guy, no problem. Well, what he didn't know was Denny Crum had played for John Wooden at UCLA and was a pretty darn good shooter. So it took a while, but of course, as always, Bird hits the last shot, Crum misses the last shot, Bird has the final word, and he never went to Louisville, not even for a visit.
So you mentioned Kentucky. Why didn't he go to Kentucky?
I think he would have liked to. I think it would have been interesting to see, had Joe B. Hall continued on his recruitment of Larry Bird. He did go there for a visit with his parents, and of course you can imagine his mom and dad sitting in Rupp Arena, which is the loudest place I have ever been for a college basketball game. The whole building shakes. And there he was sitting there with his parents, and they come rumbling out, and the place goes crazy. And of course the Birds have never seen anything like this in their life. And Kentucky wins the game, and Bird had watched Kentucky on television with his dad on occasion and was incredibly impressed and went back and thought, maybe I could go to school there. So Joe B. Hall did, have that one visit with him, but then later on, through his high school coach, got word to Bird that, we just think you're a little too slow. We're not sure you can get your shot off in the SEC, so we're not going to recruit you anymore. And Bird, with his very long and stubborn memory, never forgot it. And couldn't wait to settle the score with Joe B. Hall. Unfortunately, never got a chance because his team never did play Kentucky ever.
Was he extra motivated then in the WIT playing when he learned that Hall was the coach?
Well, he was mad. He actually, I think for a moment he probably considered not even playing because he figured what kind of chance would I have, and he was kind of right. Joe B. Hall didn't really give him much of a chance.
So how did you track down Magic and Larry's former college teammates?
That was a little harder than the pro teammates. So many of the pro teammates I knew, I've known all these years. The college guys are a little harder. Usually one would lead to another. The trainer of Indiana State was instrumental in helping me finding a lot of the college teammates. Larry wasn't much help at all because he really doesn't keep in touch with too many of his college teammates. Irvin had numbers, but they were all old and out of date. So it was just a lot of good old-fashioned legwork, and it took some time. And some of them I never did track down.
Detective
Bill Hodges,
mode.
for instance, Larry's college coach. I must have called him 25 times. He worked for a high school in Virginia, and never could track him down. He never returned my calls, and I knew he worked there because I had spoken to the secretary. And what I found out later was that there was another book that had come out written by Seth Davis, a fine writer, who wrote about Bird and Magic, and I think Bill Hodges felt a loyalty to Seth. And also I found out from Larry later on that he had asked Larry Bird for a job in the Pacers organization, and Larry wasn't able to find him one, and Bird speculated that perhaps that's why Hodges wouldn't, contribute to Larry's book.
Were you surprised to learn about the jealousy among his teammates? Bird's teammates in college?
Not so much. It seemed to me it was self-evident because you heard so much about Larry ducking out, not talking to the media. And I think he did that because he was getting too much attention. And knowing Larry the way I do, he was a guy that just wanted to play and leave me alone. And of course that was never possible because he was this sensation. And so it was, I think, almost expected there would be some jealousy among Larry's teammates and among Irvin's teammates.
Talk about the Billy Tubbs press conference after the NCAA game between Michigan State and Lamar.
Yeah, Lamar. Now,
Pause. I don't have a jealous bone in my body. So I can never really just understand, especially in like team sports, why you would ever. I mean, obviously, I know why some people have jealousy. They want the attention. Maybe they don't feel like they're getting recognized as much for their merits and their talents and their production and contributions. But I can't be jealous, man. I can't be no hater. It's not in my blood, and I see why, but I don't understand it. You know what I mean? Because I can't. I want you to succeed. Be the best version of you, and if it comes with glory, so be it. But Ain't nothing to be jealous about. It's all love. It's all admiration. It's all love. It's all respect. But ain't me. Let's continue.
So Billy Tubbs, who's known much better in later years as the coach of Oklahoma, he's going to play Michigan State. Now, you got to remember back then, not everybody's on TV, as we already discussed, so it's really hard to scout these teams. So there was a great basketball mind named Bill Burke, still is with the Lakers in some capacity, a wonderful basketball mind. He started a scouting service. And so he sent, Lamar wanted one of the scouting services of Michigan State. Well, it so happens the day that they sent their service to Michigan State, they were playing Indiana. And it became apparent to Judd Heathcote right away that Bob Knight was going to not let them run their usual fast break team. So he played a slow it, walk it up kind of style of basketball. So the man working for the scouting service who was watching this game wrote in his report correctly for that game that Michigan State was a walk it up the floor kind of team. Well, of course, they were anything but that. They were all about transition and fast break and trapping, and they had, all. So the scouting report that Billy Tubbs got from Michigan State couldn't have been any more wrong, and he actually ripped it up in the post-game press conference and said, this was useless, and he was right, it was.
Explain how a Detroit sports writer prepared Magic for his NBA career.
Well, Irvin, you got to remember now, Irvin's finishes his sophomore year at Michigan State. They win the national championship, and there's a lot of pressure for him to go back for his junior season. Greg Kelser was graduating. He was a graduating senior, was going to try to go on to the NBA. But a lot of the other players were coming back, and there was really a lot of pressure from the community for Irvin to stay. So he took kind of a straw poll around and with some help from Julius Irvin and some of the people that helped him, and realized, no, I need to go pro. So when he made the announcement, he was expecting it to be quite exciting in the area and a coronation of sorts. But there was one sports writer who said, I think it was Joe Falls, who said, he's not ready. He can't shoot. And by the way, he was right. At that time, he really couldn't shoot. He can't shoot. I'm not sure he's going to be able to get away with all those histrionics dribbling the ball when he gets in the pros. He's a little too big for a point guard. I think he's too slow. And so talk about motivation. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Those kind of criticisms weren't that far off the mark, because as a college player, Irvin really wasn't a good perimeter shooter. He had to turn himself into that. And his ball handling skills weren't the best. That was something he had to work on, but he had all the motivation he needed from all those press reports.
And how did the Chicago fans, how were they largely responsible for Johnson becoming a Laker?
Well, the poor Chicago fans, it was a coin flip to determine who was going to get the #1 pick. Now, the Lakers had someone else's pick. They were not one of the worst teams, but the Bulls were. They were one of the worst teams in the league. And the way they did it back then, now they do it differently, of course, they have a lottery, was a coin flip. And they had a little coin flip over a squawk box in the NBA offices. And it was a question of heads or tails. And
wow.
The Chicago Bulls, ever the promotional people, decided to let their fans pick whether it should be heads or tails. So the fans, I forget, I think they picked heads. If they picked heads, it was tails. Either way, the Chicago fans picked the wrong thing. And so the coin flip, the #1 pick, went to the Los Angeles Lakers. Can you imagine?
What? Are you serious? That is bonkers. And then you might say, wow, Chicago lost on a coin flip. But in hindsight, they ended up getting 6 world championships by sucking for a little bit longer and drafting Michael Jordan. Just saying. So we know what happened with that. Who knows how many championships they would have won with Magic? Would he have been able to turn that particular roster around like he did with the Lakers when he came in as a rookie? Who knows? In an alternate universe, that story plays out some kind of way.
Imagine? But Michael Jordan never would have played for the Chicago Bulls. If they had Irvin Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan never would have played there. So they did okay at the Chicago Bulls in the end.
Yeah. Bird is known during his NBA career for having remarkable ability to shoot the ball anywhere at any time. Mm-hmm. Yet he says that he was a better shooter before the NBA. Why?
Yeah, he really was. He was playing softball with his buddy Neil Heaton. He actually was filling in for his college buddy Neil Heaton. At this point, Larry is done with school. He's doing his student teaching, doing driver's ed and some other things at a local high school. So Neil Heaton asked him to come in and fill in for his softball team. So he said, sure. Well, he shows up, and who's on the other team but his brother? So Larry's playing out in the outfield, and his brother hits this kind of spinning, looping ball, almost like a Tim Wakefield knuckleball. It's just spinning all over the place. And Larry tries to go down to make a basket catch, and his finger goes all the way back, and he's like, man, wow, it really hurts. And he looked down, and his finger was completely dislocated and mangled, and it really was bothering him. He had to stop playing right away, and his brother came over and almost vomited just looking at him. It was really, really bad. So, they took him to the emergency room. They strapped it up, they taped it up, and whatever. And Bird went out the next morning, went morel mushroom hunting, because it was hunting season. Big deal down in Indiana, do the morel mushroom hunting. And by the time he came out of the woods late in the day, they said, where you been? They're looking for you. You've shattered your knuckle. You need surgery right away. So now remember, he's been drafted by the Celtics during this point, but he has not signed a contract yet. So his finger is in a bad way. He has to have major surgery with clips put in and pins and everything else. And he never tells the Celtics this has happened. But sooner or later they get word, and they summon him to Boston, and the trainer examines him and says, and the team doctor examines him, and they say to Red Auerbach, this guy's damaged goods. Now, Red's like, really? So he says, come on, Larry, get dressed. So Larry puts on his stuff. Red throws him the ball. He goes out. He starts shooting from all over the floor. He's hitting from everywhere. Throws him a few bounce passes, has him throws a few overhead passes, and he said, you look fine to me, kid. And Bird said, great. But Bird to this day will tell you he's never had the same feel for the basketball since he injured that finger. He said, I've never been able to feel the ball quite the same way again. So as great as he was in the NBA, pre-softball career, Larry Bird might have even been greater.
Wow.
Pause. I've heard that story before, but not quite in that amount of detail. So that was actually really good to hear. And, had Red just listened to the doctor and not, took Larry, brought him into the gym, let me see what you got, and just been like, all right, well, the finger looks like shit. The doctor says it's shit. Your damaged goods, no longer interested. You see how, man, history is amazing. How things play out is amazing. But I haven't heard it in that much detail, so that was actually really cool to hear. But that's crazy to think about, like, on top of all the other injuries Larry has had to deal with, and he could have been a better shooter off rip, as great of a shooter he was. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable.
Now, we know about his mangled finger, and we also know about his achy back during his career. Another injury that people probably assume is a result of a grueling NBA schedule, but that wasn't the case, was it?
Well,
achy back is a major understatement.
It's funny. Bird's very first back injury was actually caused shoveling gravel in his backyard. He had put in a new basketball court in his home, and he had asked his brother Eddie and some of his friends to spread the gravel around. There was a pool there too, and Eddie didn't do it. Eddie had he was a young kid. He was lazy. He just didn't get to it. So Bird was so angry. He said, "The heck with it. I'll do it myself." And while he was shoveling gravel, that's the first time he felt that extreme pain in his back. Now, I will tell you this. He had a congenital back problem. The canal that led through the nerves through his spine was too small. He was going to end up with those back problems anyway, but it was started in typical blue-collar lunch pail style, Larry Bird shoveling his own gravel.
Well, we're on the subject of his injuries. There are two instances that you write about in the book that I found remarkable. We all know about Game 5 against the Pacers when Bird slammed his head on the floor and came back. Tell us about Del Curry elbowing him, and then about his toe infection in 1985.
Well, he took an elbow to the head, and it hurt. It felt funny. He couldn't really figure out what was going on. It was, I thought he probably had a concussion, of course, and back then they just get out and go play. So, so he went into the locker room and said to the doc, man, this doesn't feel right. And he was having trouble. He was seeing double a little bit, but he played. He kept on playing. He got back into the locker room. He went to blow his nose, and literally his eye came out of its socket. He had just completely destroyed his face and ended up having major surgery on his face the next day. But of course played through all that. But the toe story, and it was M.L. Carr who was in the trainer's room when this happened. Bird came in, I think it was 1985, and said, hey, Doc, my foot's bothering me. It's really and so, Bird never complained. So Dr. Silva said, all right, well, take off your shoe. He took off his shoe. He had this incredible, awful, ugly, horrific infection in his toe. And he said, Larry, my God, where have you been? Why didn't you tell me about this? Bird said, I don't know. I thought it would go away, but, it's not going away. It really hurts. He said, you have a very, very serious infection. Listen, I know you're going to play and stuff, but I can take care of this right now. We're going to have to get you some Novocaine or something, because I'm going to have to lance this thing right now. I'm going to have to cut your foot open. And Bird said, nah, just throw me one of those beers over there. That'll work. So he cracked open a beer, started drinking the beer, and the doc cut him up. That's
I heard that story.
We will be
But
right back
not
after
in
a short
so
break.
much detail either. This is good. More context, more insight.
Welcome back to our conversation with Jackie McMullen on her recently published book with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird titled When the Game Was Ours. We heard Jackie tell the humorous stories of Larry's toughness when it came to his injuries, but what I think people don't know is just how injured he was. I'm going to read now an excerpt from Jackie's book about the famous mangled finger. After the procedure, the doctor attempted to immobilize the finger by putting a clip behind Bird's fingernail. One evening, while Bird was watching television, the clip gave way and the fingernail ripped off, leaving Bird yelping in pain and splattered with his own blood. The book mentions several times about the personal rivalry between Bird and Magic, one that during their careers we might not have known about. At what point did you realize just how competitive they were toward each other, not just the Lakers and the Celtics? Was it during the book?
Not till I did this book. If there was one thing people always ask me, what surprised you most, that would be it. I knew that Irvin was a little obsessed with Larry. Just from my conversations with him, he would ask me, oh, well, what's Larry been like this week? And, what has he got? What kind of injuries does he have this week? He would ask a lot of questions. Larry never ever let on to any of us, his teammates, his coaches, anybody, what he was thinking. So I wasn't shocked to learn that Irvin had been charting Larry very closely, but I was stunned to learn how jealous Larry was of Irvin. Now you got to remember, he loses in the NCAA championship to Irvin. Then the next year they're rookies in the NBA. They come out, they both have great years. But remember, Irvin's playing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so he's second fiddle there. He's the facilitator. He's not scoring a ton of points. Bird, on the other hand, is the rookie sensation, putting up numbers all over the place. So not surprisingly, when the Rookie of the Year voting comes in, Larry Bird's the winner. I think Irvin kind of knew that would happen. But it's right during the NBA Finals, and of course the Celtics are eliminated. They've lost to the Sixers. The Lakers and the Sixers are about to play Game 6 with Kareem on crutches and Magic about to play all 5 positions.
Right.
And it's just before that he learns of the Rookie of the Year voting. So the PR guy tells him, you lost. And Irvin said, no, okay, right. Was it close? And he said, oh, no. It was 63-3. Well, Irvin was so upset and so angry and so jealous that everybody thought Larry Bird was that much better than him that he told everybody that would listen, you want to see who the best rookie is? You watch me tonight. And, of course, he went out there and put on, I'm going to say yes, the most remarkable performance of any rookie ever in the history of the NBA Finals. 47 out of 48 minutes, dominated the game, played all 5 positions, won the MVP, and the Lakers won the championship. Now, meanwhile, Larry is in Boston watching this game, which back then in 1980 was on tape delay. Gives you an idea of how far the NBA has come.
Right.
Larry's in a bar, a restaurant with...
Pause. She's saying this. This probably came out in 2004, 2005. So, how far the NBA came from that point to where they are now at the time of this documentary. Imagine now how far the NBA has came. When you're talking tape delays and getting instant information and instant media out. It's on a whole nother level than even what it was when she's talking. Crazy.
Some friends, and he knows the proprietor who was able to get a live feed of the game into the restaurant. So they're watching it live, and he's sitting there watching Magic dominate this game, rebounding, assists, points, and he is so angry and so irritated that he goes home to Dinah, his girlfriend, and wakes her up and says, you know what? I got to win something, because in his mental scoreboard, Irvin's up 2-0, and he couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand it.
He evened the score eventually.
He did. He did. Although the final score in championships was 5-3 Irvin, which, believe me, if you want to get Larry upset, just mention that.
Now, Magic discusses in the book his HIV announcement and how people's
2010.
attitudes and reactions towards him changed dramatically.
Yes.
You write about 2 instances, relatively small gestures, that really meant a lot to Magic. Can you talk about those?
Well, you have to understand that he's a guy that loves to hug people and touch people. That's what he's about, always has been about. He embraces that, the public, whereas Larry was always, almost claustrophobic with the public. And I think it was very painful for Irvin, for not only strangers to all of a sudden not want to touch him or shake his hand, but his own teammates, even some of his friends, to really back off him. He would go to hug them, and they would stiffen up and back away. So this was the kind of environment he was living in. And his own teammates wouldn't work out with him because they were afraid to get their sweat on him. It became a really difficult time in his life. And so he got used to, he would always show up in his practice gear because he just couldn't get basketball out of his system. And one day he was working out down the end of the court by himself, and he hears somebody yell, "Hey, Magic, you want to do a little one-on-one?" And he looked down, and he couldn't believe it because no one would go near him. And it was Ronnie Cycli of the Miami Heat, the young center from the Miami Heat, who was working out and wanted a partner and said, "Hey, Irvin, Magic, come down here with me, work out with me." And Ronnie Cycli had no way of knowing how much it meant to Magic that this young player was willing to bang with him and to sweat with him and to work with him. And then the other, of course, was Pat Riley, his old coach, who was the coach of the New York Knicks. And when they came to town, Irvin was in town. Riley, and if you know Riley, he's just an incredible stickler about pregame preparation, getting everything just right. He spends hours before every game reviewing the film of the opponent and everything. But on this day, he got changed into his practice gear, had Irvin changed into his practice gear, and put him through one of the old-fashioned Laker workouts for about 2 hours before the game, pretty much ignoring his responsibilities as the coach of the Knicks for that one day. And then in the pregame, as they were getting ready, he did a wonderful video tribute called "Do You Believe in Magic?" and played that music for Magic on the big screen. And it was a great gesture from a man, Pat Riley, who usually doesn't, another guy very close to the vest, more like Larry than Irvin, really, showing how much he cared about his point guard.
And everybody knows how during the career of Magic and Isaiah Thomas were such good friends. Magic calls Thomas's reaction to his HIV announcement the biggest disappointment of his life. Why?
Yeah. Well, I think it was just devastating to him. Irvin and Isaiah were the best of friends. When the Pistons used to come to LA to play, if the Lakers were out of town and the Pistons were coming to play the Clippers, Magic would leave him the keys to his house. When he built his mansion, he had a special room built called the Isaiah Room. It was his guest room, and it was for Isaiah. They vacationed in the summers together. Their wives were friends. They were very, very close. They shared all their dreams together. But so for when this HIV announcement came, and as we just talked about, the reaction of all these people around him, people that he thought were his friends, to back away and to shy away from him, and then to find out that Isaiah Thomas, the one guy he thought he was going to be able to count on through all of this, to find out that he was questioning Irvin's sexuality, how he got this disease, and questioning people about it, it was devastating to him. And
so people may ask, like, why were people reacting to it like they did? And it's because there wasn't a whole lot of information on HIV at the time. There's a whole lot of unknown about the details of it. Information really wasn't available. Just the overall details of the virus, how you might, different ways you can acquire it, how it's spread, how it manifests itself in the body, all that kind of stuff. So people just assume the worst, right? And assume the worst, and they start fabricating scenarios in their heads, and to some degree start believing them, and then acting accordingly. But yeah, that's why a lot of people felt that way, and eventually led to Magic Johnson retiring because of the backlash from players and organizations about his disease and playing in the league. Misinformation and lack of information.
I think, when I talked to his wife Cookie about it in particular, she said the hurt didn't go away from his face for a long, long time, because at that point you're looking, who are my real friends? Who are the people that are willing to have my back no matter what? And interestingly enough, one of the biggest people was Larry Bird.
How was he one of the biggest people?
Well, you know what? The minute he found out about the diagnosis, he wanted to talk to Irvin. Everybody else was like, "Oh, this is terrible. Can I talk to him?" "Well, no, he's busy." And Larry said, no, I need to speak with him. And he called him, wanted to talk to him. And of course, Irvin ended up cheering Larry up because Larry was devastated by this diagnosis. And what he did was, very quietly, because that's all Larry does everything, during this time where people were really shunning away from him, Larry's the one that sent him a little note, get a job, or something a little funny like that, or make a phone call, or support him publicly by saying something nice about him in the papers. And there were subtle little things, but there were things that Irvin desperately needed.
That's beautiful.
He's doing really, really well. There's no trace of the HIV virus in his system, which he's very excited about. But as he cautions, and every time I talk about this, he asks me to do the same, he still takes his medication. He's never stopped taking his medication. And he said one of the big mistakes of the HIV population is they start feeling good. They start feeling really good. The medicine works. And there are some side effects from the medicine that aren't so great. So they think, you know what? I'm just going to go off the medicine until I start feeling bad again. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. You need to stay on your medication at all times, and because the relapse can be very serious, and the last thing you want to do, obviously, is contract the AIDS virus itself. HIV is very different than the full-blown AIDS. But Irvin's very smart about what he does. He has a very specific regimen workout, a very specific diet. Much to his dismay, he can't eat a lot of what he used to eat. He was never a drinker, so that's not an issue. So he takes very good care of himself. It's not by accident that he's got this great health report, because he takes it very seriously.
The Abbott Corporation and Johnson Foundation created the We Stand With Magic campaign. This was created in 2006 to reduce the rate of HIV and AIDS in the African American communities. Magic and his wife Cookie have made great changes in the public perception of HIV. Take a look at these public service announcements.
When I was first diagnosed with HIV, Cookie and I decided to fight this disease. Now we're here to urge you to stand with us in the fight against HIV.
In the U.S., about half of the new HIV cases have occurred among African Americans.
Get informed, get tested. Early detection can save your life. If you test positive, seek treatment from a doctor.
Ladies, are you talking to your partners
about HIV?
2 out of every 3 new HIV/AIDS cases in women are among Black women.
Get informed, get tested. Early detection can save your life. If you test positive, seek treatment from a doctor.
Join the campaign to end Black AIDS, a partnership between Abbott and the Magic Johnson Foundation.
In 1991, Irvin Magic Johnson founded a nonprofit corporation called the Magic Johnson Foundation. This foundation works to develop programs and support community-based organizations that address the educational, health, and social needs of ethnically diverse urban communities.
I've always heard about Cookie for years, and he always talked about Cookie. But this is my first time actually seeing her. I've never let me see what Cookie looks like. Pretty lady. Pretty lady. Go ahead, Cookie.
Now let's look back in history to the time when Magic and Larry were in Barcelona. What was Magic's role in getting Larry on the Olympic team?
Well, Larry didn't want to play on that team. You know, his back was shot. He was really in a bad way. In fact, within a year after that, he had major back surgery. Actually, within a month or two after that, he had major back surgery. And he just didn't feel like he could play. He was having trouble practicing with the Celtics. He knew it was his last season with the Celtics, 1992. He didn't tell anybody that, but he knew he couldn't go on. In fact, he probably shouldn't have played that final year, maybe not even the final 2 years of his career. He was in a position where he couldn't drive more than 10 feet. He'd have to get out of his car and stand up. He had to wear a fiberglass body brace most of the time when he wasn't playing. So he just didn't feel like he was going to be able to be a contributor to the team. Now, everybody wanted him on. Dave Gavitt kept saying, we need three-point shooters. They play zone in the Olympics. We really want you. But I think it was Irvin that just said, you know what, Larry? It won't be the same without you. Let me pass the ball to you one more time, like we did in that World Invitational Tournament. Just to play one game with me, and then you don't have to play anymore. And I think that and the combination of Gavitt placing that little idea in his head, oh, okay, they do play zones. I can still shoot. I think those were the two things that convinced Larry to join them.
And what was Magic's role in getting Larry on the Newsweek cover?
Well, the Newsweek cover was originally supposed to be just Irvin and Michael Jordan. And then they started talking about maybe Barkley, maybe David Robinson, some others. And Irvin said, you know what? I'm not doing this cover unless Larry Bird's on it. And so that's how it went. Larry Bird, Irvin, I think Michael, and I can't remember if Barkley made the cut or not in the end. But those three, you know, Irvin wasn't going to do it unless Larry was also represented.
And why wasn't Isaiah Thomas on the team, even though he was clearly one of the best players in the game at the time?
Here we go.
Well, Isaiah was just an unpopular guy. He wasn't someone that people got along very well with. Michael Jordan was very clear in saying, if he's on the team, I'm not playing. Now remember, Jordan's already won his Olympic gold. This wasn't his first Olympic Games.
Here we go.
Magic and Larry, because of the way their college eligibility went, had never had the chance to play in the Olympics. That wasn't true with Jordan. He had won an Olympic gold medal before. So it was, you know, this is before with the whole concept of Dream Team had really been solidified. And so Michael said, you know, if he's on the team, forget about it. I don't want to deal with that guy. I don't want to play with him. And this is normally the time when Irvin would say, oh, come on, Michael. Look, I know he's a pain in the neck. I know he's your favorite guy, but you know he's the best point guard in the league right now. You know we need him. Come on, guys. Come on, everybody. I know he's not your favorite. Let's put him on. But in the wake of all the HIV scuttlebutt, if you will, this was the one time that Irvin said, you know what? I'm not going to bat for him. Now, he didn't say, hey, I don't want him either.
Magic was like, fuck that guy. Bro, I never thought about that. That's true, yo. Yo, Magic's like, I ain't going to bat for you. I'm not going to try to talk Jordan down a little bit. Fuck you. That's funny.
Either, but he certainly didn't go to bat for him. And if Irvin wasn't fighting for Isaiah Thomas, and the coach, Chuck Daly, who was the Olympic coach, but also his Detroit Pistons coach, if he wasn't fighting to the death for him, nobody was going to.
Mm-hmm.
How was that Olympic team used as a model for others?
Oh, it was the best team of all time. Because it was the best assembled talent, I think, of all time. But also because they played like a team. Larry and Magic were named the captains. Now, clearly, Michael Jordan was the best player on the planet at that point, but he got it. He understood this was Larry's final hurrah. He understood that Irvin would probably never play again. Of course, he did, but that was later. You know, he understood that these guys were at the end of the line, and he did a very magnanimous thing for a guy with a very big ego, by the way, and handled it, I thought, very, very well. These guys did not get caught up in who got the points, who got the minutes, who got the glory. Magic got most of the glory. That was his personality. His story was too good to be true, the whole HIV thing. Everybody embraced that around the world. Larry didn't care. Michael didn't care. Barkley didn't care. Malone didn't care. None of them cared. They were out there to make history as this incredible once-in-a-lifetime team. Their only goal during the Olympics was to never call a timeout. And not once during the entire Olympic Games did Chuck Daly call a timeout.
What?
Why was that their goal?
Because it proved that they were so good that they were never going to have, that no game would ever be in doubt. And they were right. They never
called a time out? I like that. I like that mentality. Our goal is to never call a timeout. We don't need to. We are going to stomp mother heads into the ground. That's a cool little note there. That's dope.
called one.
Why did Dave Gavitt ask Larry to put off retiring for 2 more weeks when clearly he was too hurt to play anymore?
Yeah, I mean, Dave knew better than anybody because Dave was part of the Olympic Committee too, USA Basketball. So he saw what Larry went through in Barcelona, and he knew that Larry wasn't going to be playing much longer. So Larry went in, I think it was about 3 weeks after those Olympic Games, and said, I'm done, I'm retiring. And Dave said to him, you know, hang on a couple more weeks. And Larry said, Dave, I know what you're doing. I know in a couple more weeks my next year's salary kicks in. I think it was about $7 million. Larry said, I'm not taking any money I'm not going to earn. And I wouldn't be earning that money, so you can have it. I'm retiring right now, today. And he did. And I remember, I was on vacation with my family. I had my first child. She was 3 months old. I was in Ossipee, New Hampshire, in a cabin with no phone. And they still found me to drive home and cover the Larry Bird retirement press conference. So it was that big and that sudden. It just happened like that. He went in that morning. That afternoon, they had the press conference. He didn't want a lot of hoopla. He didn't want a lot of advance notice. That was the way Larry wanted to go out.
No farewell tour.
No, his wife was in Indiana getting her hair done. She was too emotional, didn't want to be there. So he went home, you know, had some dinner with some friends, and that was it.
He calls that press conference one of the happiest days of his life. Why?
Yeah. Well, he was done playing. He was, you know, he loved the game, but the game by that point, or his body had betrayed him by that point. He couldn't play anymore. He couldn't play at the level he wanted to play. And the big thing for Larry was he couldn't practice. Larry wasn't happy unless he could practice because that's how he got so good. And so many, you know, his back was so bad that when he wasn't playing, he was wearing that brace. He certainly wasn't practicing with the team, and he couldn't get his rhythm in. He couldn't get his, you know, his touches like he liked to. So I think he was tired of being in pain and tired of having to play above all these problems. So I think for once he could finally say, you know what, I'm done. And he knew, because he had serious back fusion surgery. He knew he could never play again. He said it was easy for me to stay retired, unlike Irvin, Jordan, and some of these others who thought they wanted to retire and came back. Larry said, I knew I could never come back because of the fusion surgery. So for me, it was as final could be.
Right.
And I think it was just a huge relief after 12, 13 seasons of just beating his body to a pulp.
Yeah.
Now, Larry had a very successful 3-year run as coach of the Pacers, even though they never won a championship.
Oh, they came as close as you could
Yeah,
get
I know.
them. Yeah.
I just want to pause there. That's enough. I've never thought about that, and just other players that might have, you know, had a really damn good career, but ended up getting cut short because of an injury, and you knew, hey, this is it. Even if I want to come back, I can't. I can't be who I want to be or who I know I can be, or I can't just at all, period, physically. And when you go out that way, it does allow you to more easily leave the game behind and then move on into other endeavors or whatever you want to do moving forward, as opposed to players that constantly are having this internal turmoil and struggle and back and forth with I missed the game, I want to come back, and they just have trouble letting it go. But when you don't go out on your own terms, makes it a little bit easier to let the game go.
Yep.
He didn't enjoy that same success as president.
Right.
Yet he's done that for far longer. Which role do you think he enjoys more?
Well, I think he always wanted to be in the front office. The coaching for him was a necessary evil to learn about the front office. He always said he wouldn't coach more than 3 years, and he did exactly what he said he would do, unlike almost everybody else. And he was a very, very good coach. I will say this, though. His tenure as president, if you will, in my mind, we're only into its second year. Because the whole time he was there, Donnie Walsh, who I have a great deal of respect for, was there too and really did have the final say. So I think in many ways, even though most people feel as you do that, his tenure, because he certainly had input and major input into the team, I really believe that it's only been in the last 2 seasons that we've seen Larry Bird as the president. So I think you'd like to see it through. There's talk about him stepping down after the season. I don't expect to see that happen. He's not a quitter. He has some work to do. He knows it. And I think he relishes the challenge. I think this is something he's always wanted to do, and now finally can do it without anybody else looking over his shoulder.
So do you think?
Pause. Larry Bird was a damn good coach. And I remember the 97-98 season, Jordan's last season as a Bull. He was coaching the Indiana Pacers. Man, he coached the hell out of that Pacers team with Reggie Miller, Mark Jackson, Rick Smits, I think Austin. No, I don't think Austin Crozier was on that team. Rick Smits. Who else am I forgetting? Was it Dale Davis on that squad? Hold on, let me check. Or am I getting my generations mixed up? Hold on, I gotta see. I gotta see now who's on that squad. Let me check my phone real quick. All right, so 97, 98. But I was gonna say, he coached that team to the Eastern Conference Finals, Game 7. I'm pretty sure they went to Game 7, Eastern Conference Finals with the Chicago Bulls, and it more or less came down to the wire. If I remember, I'm pretty sure that was, if it wasn't 7, it was 6 games, but I think it was 7. Down to the wire, I think. Reggie, Mark Jackson, Smits. I really think Dale Davis, but I know I'm forgetting somebody. No, Austin Crozier was on that team. Austin Crozier was definitely on that team. That 98 team. 97-98 team. Mark Jackson, Reggie, Rick Smith, Austin Crozier, Dale Davis. Let me see. Who else was on that squad? Did I say Jalen Rose? I don't know if I said Jalen Rose. Jalen Rose, let me see. Oh, here we go. Travis Best was on that squad. Yup. And Antonio Davis. Fred Hoiberg. Chris Mullin. How did I forget Chris Mullin? Mark West, yep. Mark Pope, yep. That was they had a squad, man. They had a squad. Larry coached the hell out of that team. No question, man. No question.
Think he'll never return to coaching?
No, he told me, well, he emphatically used to say he would never coach, period.
Yeah.
There's no scenario that I can imagine him coaching ever again.
Why has he soured on the Celtics?
I don't think he has. I think Larry's a guy that moves on. At the end of his tenure with the Celtics, he had had his fusion surgery. He was a special assistant to Dave Gavitt, who he loves and respects very much. The team was struggling. Dave made some questionable personnel moves, and so he was on his way out. They were going to get rid of him. Larry disagreed vehemently with that. They did remove Dave. Larry stayed on as the special assistant. That was his title. But the day they got rid of Dave Gavitt was the day he made up his mind. I'm not staying with this franchise any longer. The reason he did linger on for a couple more years was because of his back. He had had major surgery, and he wanted to make sure his insurance was all set and that he was fully recovered before he walked away from that insurance. And so when they brought in Rick Pitino, Bird was one of the people heading up the search committee for Paul Gaston and looking for a new coach. He recommended Larry Brown and some others, and Pitino, and didn't think Pitino was going to get the job. Really thought Larry Brown was going to get the job. And in the end, Pitino pulled an end around, as you would call it, and snuck in there under the wire and got the job, and offered Larry a job in his organization. Well, that job was an assistant coach. Are you kidding? So Larry was never going to stay. So I don't think Larry has a ton of bitterness about it. Pitino isn't there anymore. Paul Gaston isn't there anymore. I think with him, it was just a matter of, he went to try to go back and buy the team from Paul Gaston. Gaston said the team's not for sale, and then, of course, a year later, sold it to someone else. I think Bird's feeling was, you know what? That happened. It's too bad it happened. I'm moving on. He's very good at moving on. He doesn't look back, hardly ever. Irvin looks back all the time. Irvin has his own plane and is playing the old clips from the '87 NBA championship. I bet you Larry hasn't seen that in 15 years. That's just the kind of guy Larry is. I'm done with this. I'm moving on.
Do you ever foresee a time when he would return to the Celtics fold, and if so, in what capacity?
I do. I think he would still like to buy the Boston Celtics at some point, but I don't know that they're for sale right now. Although I will tell you this, that the revenues in the NBA are, it's alarming to me what's happening. You know, the Celtics, as good as they've been, they won that championship, and they have certainly a championship contending team again. There's a lot of suites that are empty. And when you watch the games on television, you see a lot of the same commercials over and over. That's not a good sign either. So I think the economics of the NBA right now are pretty tough. And as I joke with Larry, as we were doing this book, Larry, myself, Irvin, and Irvin's agent, Lon Rosen, all had high school seniors, so we've all got tuition to pay.
So I know originally I said I thought just trying to gauge on based on what they're saying and some things I've watched. I said this interview might have been in 04-05, but something did pop up earlier in the video where it showed historically, you know, what the Lakers and Boston Celtics have done, and then it said 2010. So I think this at a minimum as of 2010. Maybe later. And then they just mentioned, pretty sure when they were talking about the Celtics title, they're talking about the 2008 title and how they still have a championship contending team, which, depending on when this was in 2010, they would go back to the finals in the 2009-2010 season, albeit they lost to the Lakers, but still had a championship contending team.
Let's return to Magic for a moment. Why was the Lakers trainer investigated by OSHA?
Well, now this is when Irvin Johnson comes back for his second comeback try. He came back after his wonderful time in Barcelona. He thought, you know what? I was embraced by the world. I think this will work. He came back for a short amount of time, and people weren't ready. They just weren't. They still were ignorant of HIV and the AIDS virus, how it was transmitted. The players in the league didn't want him to come back. They were nervous, frightened about him. And unbeknownst to him, behind his back, we're going to the Lakers trainees, Gary Vitti, and saying, I don't want to play with this guy. How can you help me? I don't want to be guarding him. You know, I want you to pull me out of practice, say I have an ankle injury. You know, really a lot of this going on. So they're playing an exhibition game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and Magic goes to the hole, and he got scratched. It wasn't even cut. It was scratched. He has a little scratch on his hand, and he was bleeding. And because he was Irvin Magic Johnson and he has HIV, there was this collective gasp in the arena. Everybody seemed very aware of this. So the new regulations put in because of people like Irvin Magic Johnson who were HIV positive were that if a trainer was attending to a player with a cut or any blood, they needed to put on gloves and treat it. Now you're Gary Vitti and you're looking at this scratch, because that's really all it is, and you're thinking, if I reach into my pocket and put on my gloves, I'm telling all these players, privately I'm telling them there's nothing to worry about, you cannot contract this, you are safe, there is just an infinitesimal chance of it, nothing's going to happen to you. He said, if I put on these gloves, how will they ever believe me? So he reached in to get his gloves and said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. So he tended to the cut, you know, cleaned it off, put a Band-Aid on it, that was pretty much it, and put him back in the game. And but somebody who didn't like the Celtics or had some kind of itch with the government and this regulation, saw the picture in the next day in the New York Times of him doing that, and sued him, and sued the Lakers, and so he had to be investigated because he didn't follow protocol. And of course, he was cleared of any wrongdoing many, many months later. But the story, being investigation, was headlines, and his exoneration was a little footnote.
Why did Magic ask Larry to present him into the Hall of Fame?
I don't know. You know, I was so stunned when he did that. I was so pleased. I thought it was such a cool thing because it's almost unprecedented. Usually you pick a coach. Well, first of all, it has to be someone in the Hall of Fame. Right. You do have to pick someone from the Hall of Fame. But he had choices. He had Jerry West, you know, who was his mentor when he was young. He could have picked Elgin Baylor. He could have picked Kareem, certainly. He had some choices. And I think he just felt a kinship with Larry that he couldn't explain to anybody else. And he felt, you know, we've always been intertwined. And I know who pushed me. I know who made me the player I am. And it's you. And I want you to present me. It was, I think, one of the biggest honors of Larry Bird's life.
We will be right back after this short break.
Masterpiece Theater.
Welcome back to our conversation with Jackie McMullen on her recently published book with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. We heard Jackie tell the humorous stories of Larry's toughness when it came to his injuries, but what I think people don't know is just how injured he was. I'm going to read now an excerpt from Jackie's book about the famous mangled finger.
Let him know.
As time went on, Bird's finger built up calcium deposits and became grossly disfigured. Once, while Bird was posing for a cover shot for Sports Illustrated, the photographer told Bird to hold up his finger to signify that he and the Celtics were number 1. But when Bird held up his ghastly digit, it looked more like we're number 10. The photographer shot him using his opposite hand instead. As the NBA playoffs are going on, those of us who were glued to the TV for those great Lakers-Celtics games still long for another glimpse of Bird's no-look passes or Magic's junior hook shot. But more than their individual heroics, Magic and Bird were the ultimate team players, true representatives of those who make the people around them better, an ideal that even our current president makes mention of in his latest PSA.
Those of us who grew up playing basketball, whether on a playground in the city or a farm in the heartland, are grateful to the game for the lessons it teaches us about life. Lessons like respect is something won by what you do, not what you're born with. Or you can talk a good game all you want, but when it matters, you better back it up. Or if you want to marry a girl like my wife Michelle, you better be able to impress her brother on the basketball court. But we remember that throughout the game's history, its greatest players, its champions, are those who don't just perfect their own game, but make those around them better, who unite one team around one shared goal. They know a simple truth that's as relevant today as ever. In America, we rise and fall together. In this time of so much need in our communities and across our country, we are blessed with endless ways to restore hope and opportunity to places that yearn for both. Prepare a care package for a soldier, read to a child, or fix up a local basketball court so the next generation can play and grow. I encourage everyone to join the NBA in the spirit of service to others. Just log on to usaservice.org to find or create a project near you. Then gather up some friends and lace them up. All of us have it within our power to get off the bench, get in the game, and make a lasting contribution to the life of this nation. I hope you all answer the call and join in the vital work of remaking this country we love. Thank you.
Welcome back to our conversation.
Salute. I got to serve in the United States Air Force under Barack Obama for his entire presidency. So it was a pleasure serving under you, ex-Commander-in-Chief Barack Obama.
With Jackie McMullen on her recently published book with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird titled When the Game Was Ours. Bird and Johnson each measured their success by the number of championships they won, an edge held by Magic as superstars and the leaders on 2 elite NBA teams who entered the league at the same time. They were destined to be compared to each other. And although they played different positions, their individual accomplishments and accolades were remarkably similar. In addition to being in the Hall of Fame, each won the MVP award 3 times, each was named to the All-NBA First Team 9 times, Each is a 12-time All-Star, and each was co-captain of the Olympic team. Bird played 897 games in his career, and Magic played 906. And each played exactly the same number of minutes in his career, 34,443.
Wow. Really?
As Bird and Johnson reveal in the introduction to the book, these statistics did more than help their own teams. They helped to motivate each other. Larry writes, "When I was young, the only thing I cared about was beating my brothers. Mark and Mike were older than me, and that meant they were bigger, stronger, and better. In basketball, baseball, everything. They pushed me. They drove me. I wanted to beat them more than anything, more than anyone. But I hadn't met Magic yet. Once I did, he was the one I had to beat. What I had with Magic went beyond brothers. I never let on how much he dominated my thoughts during my playing days. I couldn't. But once we agreed to do this book, I knew it was finally time to let people in on my relationship with the person who motivated me like no other." And from Magic, Larry was a different kind of cat. He didn't say much and he kept to himself, but oh, could he play. I had never seen a player with his size pass the ball the way he did. Right away, we had chemistry. We played on the second team with a bunch of college all-stars, and we just embarrassed the starters. I knew I'd see him again, and I did, everywhere. When I got to the NBA and played for the Lakers, I watched as many Celtics games as I could so I could keep track of what he was doing. He became my measuring stick. The first time we played head-to-head in the finals, in 1984, Larry got the best of me. It took me years to get over it. Actually, I'm not sure I am over it yet. I was surprised to hear Larry describe watching me win the NBA championship in my rookie season. He admitted he was jealous, which really shocked me, because he never ever showed it back then. Of course, as you'll learn when you start reading this book, I had my own bouts of jealousy when it came to Larry. You've already talked about how the personal rivalry surprised you while you were working on the book. Anything else during, you've covered these guys forever, it seems. Anything else surprise you while you were researching this?
There were a million things. The toe infection story, I didn't know that. There were so many little anecdotes about the team on the road. Bird and Rick Roby as rookies. The NBA used to provide each visiting team, with a case of beer after the game. And you were, allowed to drink a couple of beers before you got on your bus to go home. And Bird and Rick Roby stuffing them into their pillowcases that they stole from the hotel to drag them off. Just a lot of little fun stories like that. And just the interaction between the two of them as the years went on, I found to be fascinating. The racial tension in Boston during Bird and Magic's time. Magic telling me stories about showing up at the airport and having African American people saying, why don't you kill those Celtics? And he'd say, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Boston. Well, why aren't you rooting for the Celtics? I'm not rooting for those white boys. A lot of great stories, a lot of great anecdotes. It's just the most fun project I've ever been around. I had a great time writing this book.
Were they surprised by anything they learned about the other?
Oh, sure, lots of things. Again, probably most of all, the depths to which they studied one another, I would say, more than anything, surprised them. Larry was very surprised that Irvin decided to go public with the things about Isaiah Thomas. I think he was really stunned to find out that Irvin was, that it had bothered Irvin that much that he needed to get it off his chest. So. And Irvin didn't know much about Larry growing up. He didn't know that he taught driver's ed to kids at West Vigo High School. There were a lot of things about each other that they just didn't know.
We'd like to thank our guest today, Jackie McMullen, author of When the Game Was Ours. Jackie, I was a big Larry Bird fan growing up, and there are things in this book that even I didn't know. So I highly recommend it to anybody who's an NBA fan in general, or specifically a Larry Bird or Magic Johnson fan. Even you will be surprised by some of the things you read in this book. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Books of Our Time. Be with us again for our next show.
That was an awesome documentary. That was good. A lot of stories, most of the stories I had heard before in other reaction videos, but this delved a little bit deeper into them and gave more and more story behind it. So that was dope. I like that. I want to go back to the comment I made about the jealousy thing. I want to elaborate on that. Being jealous of your own teammate. I can understand a competitive jealousy watching one of your rivals or somebody you're compared to win a championship, win an MVP, and there's a healthy competitive jealousy, which I completely understand and I get, but being jealous of, your own teammate, and they've done nothing to you outside of be a great player and perform, that That I don't understand, but them being jealous of each other as them watching each other when that should have been my championship, but Larry held that should have been my trophy, but Larry got. I can understand that. It's a healthy competitive jealousy in sports. I get it. So I want to say that, and then the racism thing. The racism thing went both ways because I thought she was going to be like. At first, I thought she was going to say all the racism in Boston geared towards African American people, especially that Bill Russell had to go through, and even still today, a lot of these players deal with that stuff in Boston. Kyrie has shared stories, Jason Tatum and them boys have shared stories, Paul Pierce shares all that stuff. But it goes both ways. It goes both ways. And some of it's reactionary, right? But yeah, great documentary there, man. Really good. Thank you again, Kelly McAllister. I can't thank you enough. This was a great documentary. Thank you for the recommendation. Anybody, if you have anything to share or add to this documentary, let me know in the comments section. I would love to hear your opinion. We've been getting a lot of great comments, especially people that lived to see a lot of this stuff go on and can provide more insight, more context. I do read all of the comments. Sometimes it may take me a few days to get to them. I like to let them build up and then spend like an hour or two just going through them all. But I encourage you to leave your comments, hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, save the video, do anything you want to that video. And I hope everybody's well. And again, thanks for stopping in, and I'll catch you on the next one. We out, baby.